Despite the fact that we have a date, there are serious doubts over the Syrian talks in Geneva. Some opposition groups are threatening not to show up, while other rebel groups are shut out. So, can meaningful discussions go ahead, and can that ever mean peace in Syria? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme with me, Peter Dobbie. Now, as the war in Syria comes close to entering its fifth year, diplomats and delegates are gearing up for discussions in Geneva. The negotiations have been delayed because of disagreements over who should attend. The UN envoy for Syria, Staffan de Mistura, says he sent out the invitations to delegates and that the list is, as he put it, inclusive as possible. We have been here before. Talks to end the war were held in Geneva in 2012 and again in 2014. On the ground and in their temporarily adopted countries, some of the fighters and their quasi-political spokespeople are saying the same thing. Preconditions, then we stay away. So how does the UN hold the talks? By talking to the right people. Let's bring in our guests. Joining me here in the studio is George Sabra, President of the Syrian National Council in Dubai. Oubai Shahbandar, Managing Director of Orient Media, and in Istanbul, there's Bonsey, Senior Syria Analyst for the International Crisis Group. Welcome to you all. Oubai, coming to you first, how do you work with all the different groups on the ground?
Well, you have a disparate set of groups from across the political spectrum, both from the opposition representing the Syrian opposition on one side of the table, and then you have the Syrian regime and the Russians on the other side of the table. What's interesting here is that for the first time, we've seen the Syrian opposition really coalesce towards a united front. Both political Syrian opposition figures and military representatives of the Syrian opposition, who actually have fighters on the ground in Syria right now, came together in Riyadh not that long ago to form a higher negotiating committee. And what we're seeing here right now, the delays partly as a result, because the Syrian opposition has pushed back against the UN envoy for not allowing the Syrian opposition to select the full representation of at the table for the negotiations in Vienna. Many Syrian opposition figures have actually accused the Russians and the Russian representatives at the peace talks for attempting to sabotage the process. You have, again, a wide spectrum of Syrian opposition figures who are secular, some are Islamist. Not at the table, obviously, is al-Nusra and ISIS, and a big point of contention on whether or not the Syrian Kurdish forces, represented by the PYD, the Kurdish Protection Forces, will also be at the table. A very controversial issue that is partly causing a lot of friction, and so yet it remains to be seen on whether or not the negotiations will take place on January 29th. My position is that prospects for peace with this process are very dim, but it does have to begin at some point. Without a political solution, this war is just going to continue indefinitely.
Bonsey in Istanbul, would it be fair to say that the political groups that talk to the rebels and the fighters on the ground, they have little stroke no operational control over what those groups on the ground do, and therein lies the problem, because they can be as keen as mustard to go to the talks in Geneva, but if the guys on the ground say no, it's not going to happen?
Well, that has traditionally been a problem for the Syrian opposition, but as Oubai alluded to, things have gotten better on their end with regard to this problem. The conference in Riyadh last month, which included a wide range of the opposition's political and military bodies, went further than ever before in bridging that gap between the political and the military. And now you have most of the main non-jihadi groups on the ground, including Islamists, who have either endorsed the political body that came out of the Riyadh conference or are indeed taking part in it. Jaish al-Islam, one of the biggest Islamist groups on the ground, chief among them. They have a role within the potential negotiating body itself. So in that regard, prospects for a new round of talks are better than previous ones because the opposition on the ground is better represented than they have been before. Now, there are numerous other problems, however, which I agree with Oubai, suggest that we shouldn't be optimistic about these going anywhere significant anytime soon.
We'll get into those during the meat of our discussion. George Sabra here in Doha. Is there a diplomatic rabbit out the hat here that Staffan de Mistura can come up with? Because his line seems to be, the bus is leaving, you've got to get on board.
First of all, it's not an accusation to the Russian by intervention with the Syrian opposition delegation in Geneva 3. Really, they did their best to manufacture their opposition, their Syrian opposition, and they want to put them inside our delegation.
Why would that be so wrong, though, sir? If they wanted to insert people into your group of people who may or may not, I'm assuming you're going to go to Geneva, why doesn't that work?
It doesn't work. Why? Because their intervention in the side of the regime, Syrian regime, and they want to do the same thing in our side. Riyadh conference was not our decision, and also not the Saudi Arabia decision. What their decision in Vienna? Why they don't respect the results of that decision? And nobody tell anything when we announced our committee for the High Committee for Negotiation, and also our communique in Geneva, in Riyadh conference. Why now they want to make intervention? You know why? Because they put their hands on the ground and they want to put their hands on the political solution.
Okay, that's an interesting point. We'll get to that in just a moment. I just want to pause the next couple of minutes because the crisis on the ground, to pick up on that point, is complex to say the least. For Inside Story, Zina Hodder breaks it down for us.
The battlefield in Syria is a crowded one, with hundreds of thousands of fighters representing various interests. While the Syrian government is backed by Hezbollah and Iranian fighters, plus Russian air power, an international coalition is conducting airstrikes against ISIL positions. All of this has changed the situation on the ground. The Syrian government is in a stronger position, and many say it now has the upper hand. Within the opposition, there are thousands of groups. Many are small, but there are powerful alliances, such as the Southern Front, Jaish al-Islam, and the Islamic Front, which includes Ahrar al-Shem and the al-Qaeda-linked al-Nusra Front. They are no longer on the offensive. Instead, they have been fighting to defend their territory. The opposition suffered a military setback in the western province of Latakia. Pro-government forces have recaptured Rabia and Selma, the rebel strongholds in the northern countryside. They are now just 13 kilometers from the Turkish border and are threatening vital opposition supply lines. The army and its allies have also turned their attention to what is known as the Southern Front. The army recaptured one of the most important towns there. Sheikh Maskin lies on the road between the capital Damascus and Dara, the birthplace of the revolution. South Syria is also one of the remaining rebel strongholds and one where the rebels are considered moderates by the international community. Further north, many of the rebel strongholds around the capital Damascus are under siege. This has forced fighters to either abandon their position or agree to truces under negotiated deals. A similar deal forced the opposition to abandon its last remaining stronghold in the city of Homs, which has been known as the capital of the revolution.
I just want to step back for a second, and George Sabra, I'm not going to ask you this question because I know what the answer would be. Noah Bonsey in Istanbul. Some people say that Bashar al-Assad deliberately radicalized the opposition so he could take away legitimacy from the rebellion. Up and down the country, is that actually what happened?
Well, that's certainly a component of it. I mean, the regime has an interest in, the regime wants as extreme an opposition as possible. Ultimately, what threatens the regime's rule is a combination, is an armed opposition backed robustly by external states, including the United States, whose support is ultimately needed, would be ultimately needed were the opposition ever to gain a decisive upper hand. So insofar as the opposition radicalizes, that has worked to the advantage of the regime's narrative, to its appeal to other countries throughout the world, in particular Western ones, to remove support from the opposition if they are providing it, or to view the opposition as a threat to their interests moving forward. In other words, the regime wants to portray itself as the only available option for a stable, non-jihadi controlled Syria. Now, of course, that's the effort they're making. That's what they're advocating. In reality, of course, the regime has not only everything the regime does militarily serves to contribute towards this radicalization. In particular, some of the collective punishment tactics it uses against opposition-held areas. These are the sieges, barrel bombs, other forms of indiscriminate attack or attacks that discriminately target civilian areas and civilian infrastructure. This has helped raise the death toll so high. It has helped drive so many people out of the country. And then, of course, all of this violence, all of these civilian casualties are a big asset to jihadi groups seeking to recruit from within a radicalized Syrian environment and to draw foreign fighters. So the regime offers itself as a solution to the problem, while in fact it is a huge part of the jihadi problem, which gets to really the challenge of any political process. Of course, a political process, be they Geneva talks or otherwise, are going to have to, it's only going to go somewhere if there are mutual concessions or an exchange of concessions by both sides. But ultimately, ending the war is going to require a transition from Assad rule. Otherwise, too many people are simply going to keep fighting.
Okay, picking up on that point of Assad rule, Oubai Shahbandar in Dubai, it occurs to me there are three narratives here. There are the groups on the ground who want Assad overthrown. They want him gone no matter what. There are other groups on the ground who are prepared to go with this 18-month timeline, a new constitution, a transitional government, then elections in 18 months. And there are still people on the ground who want him to stay, one assumes. But if the different groups on the ground share arms, personnel, and therefore territory, that's what the outside world would like. But those people on the ground, do they know what they would like? Because if their loyalties are constantly shifting, what are they going for? And how do you talk to those people?
Well, a major gap leading up to these negotiations is simply what is the objective of these talks that's going to take place in Geneva and Vienna. Syrian opposition delegation wants a strict focus on establishing a transitional governing body with full authority where Assad has no role. On the other hand, the Russians and the Assad regime are attempting to shift the narrative of the peace talks to focus simply on establishing what they call a national unity government where Bashar al-Assad is able to run in the nominal elections, which more than likely will be controlled by the Assad regime. The United Nations does not have the capacity, frankly, to monitor and to ensure fair elections in Syria, even 12, 18 months from now. So you have a severe gap in terms of what both sides are hoping to get out of these negotiations. A remarkable thing happened in the lead up to the talks. You had like as we discussed before, a diverse spectrum of Syrian military opposition and political opposition groups not only get together, but to agree on a common communique that established a common vision for a democratic and unified Syria. Now that sort of pulls the rug from underneath the Assad regime's strategic narrative that the Syrian opposition delegation in these talks have terrorist elements within them. So we have, again, a major gap on just what the definition of terrorists and extremists are, and what groups constitute extremists and terrorists. Whereas the Syrian regime defines any armed group, any opposition group that picks up arms, regardless of their ideology, as being inherently extremist. So again, I don't really see any common ground here leading up to these negotiations, and more than likely that's why we're going to see a continued impasse as we did in 2014.
George Sabra, on that point of common ground, Stefan de Mistura is saying he's going to be flexible. He's going to be Mr. Creative. To get you to sit down opposite or in proximity talks with the people that you do not want to sit down with today, come Friday, Saturday, Sunday, what kind of creativity would make you sit down opposite the people who I guess are your sworn enemies?
We did that before in Geneva too.
Not the question, sir. Not the question. Address the question looking forward to this coming weekend.
Yes.
What has to change for you to sit down and talk, or to be in the same that massive UN building in Geneva?
Yes, we have three main obstacles in front of us. The first one is we want to go to Geneva for negotiation, not for talk, as Mr. de Mistura announced. Also, we want to negotiate the other side on the base of Geneva communique, to issue TGB. This is the
TGB.
Yes, transitional governing body.
Understood.
This is the most important thing in Geneva communique, 2012. We want to negotiate for this point. The second, there are two articles in the decision 2254, number 12 and number 13. The decision talked to be implemented soon, that stop shelling people in Syria by jet fighters from the Russian and Syrian regime. The second, to break the siege on the villages and to stop killing people by starvation. Why we will carry this to the negotiation?
We're running against the clock as ever here on Inside Story. What you've just said is a restatement of your stance, and I'm grateful for that. It's also a restatement of, if Stefan de Mistura was here, he would say that's what we're asking people to do. At the moment, on the ground, we seem to be seeing something of a land grab. So what has to happen between now and Friday, Saturday, Sunday, at the beginning of 3 weeks of talks in Geneva, followed by another 5 months and 1 week of long-distance proximity talks, for you to say, yes, we will show goodwill and kick this forward?
Sir, if the international community and the United Nations and Mr. de Mistura himself couldn't send a food basket to the hungry people in Al-Madamiya and in Madaya, how can we convince ourselves that they can reach political solution in this conflict? A very hard and severe situation of Syrian people.
Okay, allow me to boil that point down and put another similar point to Noah Bonsey, who's in Istanbul for us. You've mentioned Jaish al-Islam already. That's perceived by some of the people who've got a vested interest in here as being a terrorist organization. Russia. Does Russia have more of an into talking to the people on the ground? Not Damascus, but the people on the ground.
Well, I mean, to maybe take half a step back, one of the reasons we're also skeptical about this process at this current stage is that of the relevant players here, Syrians and their backers on each side, only the United States has really shown a lot of enthusiasm for this going anywhere right now, and only the United States is really investing accordingly. Some might say naively so. Everyone else is looking to improve conditions on the ground first. Now, certainly the Russians, along with the Iranians, working alongside and on behalf of the regime, are doing that most effectively. So while Geneva, this round of talks, like previous ones, are based on the premise of sort of co-sponsorship between the United States and Russia, because of the regime gains on the ground that it is currently enabling, obviously isn't going to be in a rush to push the regime to make concessions, so long as it views the military status quo as working in its favor. Thus, it can take plenty of time to potentially delay talks by trying to put more of its allies into the opposition delegation, or by trying to list various rebel groups as terror organizations. None of this suggests that they're particularly serious, or at least not particularly in a rush to have this go anywhere. It gets back to the point, and a problem that the opposition has right now. They're in a very difficult spot. The demands that Mr. Sabra listed are not, in principle, unreasonable. The opposition is effectively asking for UN Security Council resolutions, important aspects of UN Security Council resolutions regarding an end to sieges and an end to attacks targeting civilians. They're asking for those to be implemented before talks, at least parts of those, as an indication of good intentions. That seems reasonable, but the problem is the United States in particular is pushing them to begin negotiations with or without those preconditions being met. And if the US pushes them, it's very difficult for them ultimately to say no. Because if the opposition is ever to regain the initiative, either militarily or politically, it will need American power behind them. Thus, the very difficult spot they find themselves in.
We're coming towards the end of our discussion, gentlemen, so please keep your answers brief if you can. Oubai Shahbandar in Dubai. I mean, the reality is here, Noah got into it there, talking about what happens in the future. The reality is Syria, as we knew it, is gone. It's lost. And arguably, they're not going to negotiate, to pick up on your word. They're not going to talk about talks. Do you think, call it Geneva 3, will Geneva 3 provide meaningful progress?
Well, it's very highly doubtful, frankly. The Assad regime believes that it's winning militarily, or at least that it's regained the upper hand after a series of military defeats prior to the Russian intervention. The Russians are sending in every week major logistical military supplies into Damascus. We've seen the footage published by the Russian Ministry of Defense of these massive Russian cargo aircraft delivering arms and intelligence support to the Assad regime. Frankly, Dr. Sabra and his colleagues are going to these negotiations, if they in fact take place, at a major disadvantage. We just saw in the past 48 hours, the Assad regime has made significant gains in Latakia province in the northwest and in Daraa province on the Jordanian border. It's perhaps reflective of just the brutal nature of this conflict, that the Assad regime believes that ending bombardment of civilian areas and ending barrel bombs against civilian areas is a concession in by itself. So it's really difficult to see how the Syrian opposition is set to gain from these negotiations when they do not have the upper hand militarily, at a time when it seems certainly that the Russians are investing more in helping the Syrian regime forces advance militarily, while the Americans are pushing for what seems to be, frankly, open-ended negotiations. And that's, frankly, not going to benefit the Syrian people at a time when we're seeing civilian casualties increase exponentially.
George Sabra here in the studio in Doha with me. Ignoring what we've talked about for the past 25 minutes, don't you have a duty of care? Do you not have the responsibility to go to the talks, to make concessions? Hundreds of thousands of people have died. Millions of people have been displaced. They will arguably never go back to a country that they ever recognize. And inside, we're about to find, we're being told by the UN, 15 Madayas. That's hundreds of thousands of people, possibly, who are being starved to death. You, sir, are part of a component part, and you have a duty of care to go to those talks and make it work.
Because we feel deeply with our responsibility to protect our people, to stop killing people under the barrels of Bashar al-Assad and the rockets of President Putin and under the siege. So as we feel really with this responsibility, we can't go to any place if we can't stop killing people. Our problem is we have a new enemy called Russia, and the international community introduced them as mediator. This is our problem now, and there is another problem there, that we start to lose our friends one by one. Unfortunately, not lose our friends, but the friends of the fact, friends of the freedom and democracy. We will go to the negotiation, and we went before. If there is any kind of guarantee to stop killing people and to reach political solution, I want to remind you, sir, that Iran right now didn't accept Geneva Communique 2012. What does it mean? They want to gain time, and they will push us to lose our people, sympathy of our people inside Syria.
We have to leave it there, gentlemen. Thank you so much for your contribution in the past half hour. Thanks to all our guests, George Sabra, Oubai Shahbandar and Noah Bonsey. And thanks to you as well for watching. You can leave your comments, of course, as the debate goes on our Facebook page, or get to it via our aljazeera.com website. You can post your views on Facebook as well. That's .com/AJ Inside Story. You can tweet us at AJ Inside Story, or tweet me, I'm AJ Dobbs, or you can find me at Peter Dobbie1. From me, Peter Dobbie, and everyone on the team here in Doha. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye for now. We'll do it all again at the same time tomorrow.